Hello everyone, my name is Tom Marsh. I'm a consultant for the compliance people. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the key parts of the new Building Safety Act 2022. A quick overview of today's webinar. We will go over the Building Safety Act 2022, what it is and why it's been introduced. I will go over the implementation timeline of the Act, so what we expect to see and when. We will look at the new Building Safety Regulator that is introduced as part of the Act. We'll go over the significant changes made with regards to what are defined as higher risk buildings in the Act. I'll go over what a higher risk building is in detail, but it is essentially a high-rise residential building. And we will also look at the regulations that are coming as a result of the Act in relation to construction products. So what is the Building Safety Act 2022 and why is it being introduced? It's an act of parliament that has been introduced to make significant changes in building regulation and the control of high-rise residential buildings. Being an act, much of what it introduced and how it will achieve its goals will be laid out in subsequent regulations. It aims to implement the lessons learned from the Grenfell Tower fire and remedy the systemic failures highlighted by Dame Judith Hackett in the Independent Review of Building Regulations and Fire Safety. So this review was commissioned in the wake of Grenfell, and the Act aims to implement the failures found from the review. So we're going to have a look at some of the gateways now. When looking at the Building Safety Act 2022, you are likely to come across reference to a new gateway system. The draft Building Safety Bill was published in July 2022 as a precursor to the Act that we're looking at today. And it introduced this gateway system. These gateways come into play at key stages of the design and construction of buildings, and the Building Safety Act plays a key role in the implementation of these new gateways. These gateways act as checkpoints, so points that must be passed before moving on with any construction projects. So Gateway 1 uses existing processes of granting planning permission under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 to ensure that fire safety matters are considered at the planning stage. So Gateway 1 is very much focused on the planning stage before anything has been materially built. Gateway 2 provides what is known as a hard stop. It prevents construction work from even beginning until the Building Safety Regulator, this is a regulator that's introduced in the 2022 Act we're looking at today, before the regulator is satisfied that design meets the functional requirements of building safety regulations. And building safety regulations, that also now includes this 2022 Act we are looking at now. And then we have Gateway 3. Gateway 3 comes into play when the building work is complete. The Building Control Authority, which is also introduced by the 2022 Act, assesses whether or not the work has been carried out in accordance with the building regulations before the building can be occupied. So Gateway 1 comes in at the planning stage. Gateway 2 comes in just before building work starts and must be passed before it even begins. And Gateway 3 comes after building has finished, but has to be passed before any building can be occupied. So here's an outline of the implementation timeframe of the Act and subsequent regulations that will be coming from the Act, or that we expect to see to come from the Act. So Royal Assent was given to the Act on the 28th of April 2022. Between 2 and 6 months after Royal Assent, which is the timeframe that we are sitting in now as at the time of recording, it is intended that regulations related to construction products will be published, and we will look at what this is likely to mean in a few minutes in one of the subsequent slides. But construction products themselves are products made to be incorporated permanently in the construction works. So things like bricks or metal supports that will be built into the construction itself and become a permanent part of that construction are considered to be construction products. 6 to 12 months after Royal Assent, there will be the establishment of resident panels to improve resident engagement. This will help improve communication between residents, between the regulator, and also between certain duty holders, such as the owners of buildings. And we'll also see the changes to the fire safety order come into effect. That is the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. Between 12 and 18 months after royal assent, we expect to see the establishment of a building advisory committee, the establishment of industry competency committees, and also mandatory registration of inspectors and control approvers. So, a major part of the Act is the introduction of the new regulator. The building safety regulator has been established to oversee the new, more stringent regime for high-rise residential buildings. This new regulator has the objectives of securing the safety of people in and around buildings and improving the general standard of all buildings. It's being established under the Health and Safety Executive, and the HSE is currently preparing to take on this role. The Act provides the new regulator with a range of duties related to buildings in England specifically, and include facilitating safety within high-rise residential buildings. They have the duty of keeping the safety of people in and around buildings under constant review, providing assistance and encouragement to certain people. So when we talk about certain people, this relates to registered building inspectors and those who work in the design, construction, management, or maintenance of buildings. And the new regulator also has the ability to propose regulations that it deems necessary for high-rise residential buildings with the view of fulfilling its stated objectives. Those objectives being the securing of the safety of people in and around buildings, and also improving the general standard of all buildings, not just the high-rise buildings. The regulator also has the power to appoint people that it deems as competent as authorised officers. These are individuals given investigatory powers to help the regulator in its functions by ensuring that this new regime is followed and acting as a sort of eyes on the ground for the regulator. Part 4 of the Act is a very important part, as it lays out the provisions for what it calls higher risk buildings. Higher risk buildings are referred to throughout the Act, and it means, in this Act specifically, a building in England that is at least 80 metres in height, or with at least 7 stories, and in either case containing at least 2 residential units. So high-rise residential building, essentially. So in essence, this refers to high-rise residential buildings. Part 4 of the Act also explicitly excludes hospitals and care homes, regardless of their height. As said before, the Act predominantly covers high-risk buildings in England. The Act itself does technically apply to both England and Wales. However, references to high-risk buildings in the Act are defined as buildings specifically in England. This leaves the Welsh Government to release subsequent regulations itself to implement the new regime as it sees fit. Leaseholder protections are also included for England and Wales in the Act. These include protections against the costs of fixing defects in the design and construction of their buildings. This includes the cost of removing and replacing external cladding. This cost will be recovered from developers and manufacturers, and not the leaseholder. While the Act highlights certain highlights that cladding is a situation where the cost will not fall on the leaseholder, Schedule 8 of the Act highlights some situations where the leaseholder might be required to contribute towards the cost of some remediation, so it's worth reading Schedule 8. New duty holders in relation to high-risk buildings are identified and known as accountable persons. In most cases, the accountable person will be the building owner, but it is possible for there to be more than one accountable person for a single building. That includes other people other than the building owner. However, to identify the accountable persons, as well as what is known as the principal accountable person. When there is more than one accountable person, how to identify who is accountable is laid out in the Act. So when there's more than one accountable person, it is likely that the building owner will be the principal accountable person, and other people might have some responsibility. For example, for repairing part of the building, they might also be an accountable person for that building, but not necessarily the principal accountable person. So accountable persons have obligations under this Act. These obligations and these duties include the registering of their building with the building safety regulator. Includes the accountable person. If directed by the regulator, they must apply for a building assessment certificate. What exactly this certificate is and what it includes is going to be laid out in future regulations. It's not in the Act itself, but the Act is very clear that if the regulator requests that you apply for one of these certificates, the accountable person must do so. Accountable persons also have a duty to regularly assess the building safety risks of their building and assess again if there are any changes to that building that might impact building safety risks. They must then take all reasonable steps to prevent building safety risks from materializing and to reduce the severity of any potential incidents that could occur. When their building becomes occupied, or if they become if a accountable person's building becomes occupied where it wasn't before, or if someone was to become the accountable person of an already occupied building, for example, purchasing a building that is already occupied, they must prepare what is called a case safety report. So this case safety report will contain all the assessments, it details all the assessments of the building safety risks that accountable persons have made, and also a description of the steps taken to reduce the risks materializing and to reduce the severity of potential incidents. So all this has to be recorded. The regulator must be notified when this report is first created, and then whenever the report is modified, so if a significant change came in and the report had to be updated, the regulator must also be notified of that modification. Another key area of the Act that it aims to improve on is something to keep an eye out for in the next few months, because as we saw in the implementation timeline, changes to this area, which is construction products, is likely to come. It was 2 to 6 months after Royal Assent, which is the time frame we're in now. So we are expecting to see that very soon. As said earlier in the webinar, construction products are products made to be incorporated permanently into construction works. So things that are being built, the things that a construction is made of that are going to be there permanently, or at least as long as the building is, that is considered a construction product. The Act lays down provisions for the introduction of regulations related to construction products throughout the United Kingdom. So it makes it very clear in the Act that the provisions related to construction products apply throughout the United Kingdom. So we are likely to see construction product regulations for the entire United Kingdom. These regulations, when made, are likely to include details on the general safety of construction products, the designation of standards and technical assessments for construction products, and particularly requirements will be set for what are called safety critical products. So safety critical products are still construction products, but they are ones that would cause death or serious injury to any person if they were to fail. So examples of these aren't given in the Act, and we are likely to see more details when the construction product regulations or amendments come into force in the coming months. But they are construction products that risk death or serious injury in the event of their failure. So that concludes today's webinar on the Building Safety Act 2022. Thank you for listening. To read through the Act, to have a look at its duties in more detail. You can find the Act on the Legislation Update Service under the Health and Safety legislation. So type it into the search bar and you should be able to find it. We also have published an article that goes over the Act more briefly, and that went out with June's Health and Safety newsletter. So you should be able to find it there. Again, thank you all for listening. I hope it's been informative. Thank you.